Believe it or not, there have already been 23,000 underdog drafts completed in 2025. Maybe I got the itch, all right? Maybe I ought to jump in here and see exactly what's going on and seeing how 2025 fantasy drafts are shaping up. And I noticed that there are a couple wide receivers that if they stay at this price, I will be drafting them over and over and over again. Starting off with a Mr. Chris Godwin. Now, I honestly was very surprised to see that Godwin, who, yes, is a free agent, yes, technically is not attached to Baker Mayfield this next season, and yes, technically, even if he were to go back to Tampa, which I think is going to happen, the offensive coordinator is gone, so there are reasons to be concerned, but you look at the timeline of his dislocated, sounds like he's good to go for the start of the season. Based on everything that I am reading, sounds like there is no hesitation whatsoever. Godwin will be available for this next year. You do not have to worry about the injury situation. This is not going to be Jonathan Brooks, right? If you look at his price tag, Chris Godwin's currently the wide receiver 35. He's going as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4. He's going behind Jerry Jeudy. He's going pretty much back-to-back with Caleb Johnson, an unproven rookie running back where we don't even have NFL Combine numbers yet. And in my mind, this is crazy because we go back and look at what Godwin was able to accomplish in the first half of the 2024 season. Chris Godwin averaged almost 20 fantasy points per game. He was at 7.1 receptions per game, 8.9 targets, and 83 receiving yards. Now, yes, that was only with 7 games played. Now, yes, Baker Mayfield was also at the very top of the NFL in passing yards, passing touchdowns, which we're probably not projecting that out this next season, right? I'm not going to be telling you to draft Baker Mayfield as the top 5 quarterback. So realistically speaking, we should have expected some regression coming from Godwin, regardless of if he would have got hurt or not. I don't think Godwin would have ended up being a top 3 wide receiver this last season, and I don't think Godwin should be drafted as a top 3 wide receiver this next year. But a couple things I want to point out. One, Godwin drafted in 2017 in comparison to Mike Evans back in 2014. So Godwin actually has a significant edge here if you're looking at the age of the receivers and the trajectory that we should apply in the 2025 projections. Chris Godwin will be 29 years old. And if you are looking at similar age 28 seasons from a points per game perspective, a receptions per game perspective, targets per game, as well as receiving yards per game, similar age 28 wide receiver seasons to Chris Godwin were Tyreek Hill, Antonio Brown, Marvin Harrison, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Anquan Bolden, AJ Green, Adam Thielen. So phenomenal wide receivers top to bottom. If you actually look at the range of outcomes, the worst wide receiver season that we got the following year was Adam Thielen in 2019 at 12.2 points per game. And the best season that we had the following season was Tyreek Hill with 23.6 points per game. And the median projection should be anywhere from about 16 to 20 points per game. Call it 18. So no matter how you cut it, yeah, like I said, I think Godwin, you should bake in some natural regression going into this next year. But I don't know if you're getting this discount with people worried about him maybe not being a Tampa Bay Buccaneer next season. You look at the Baker Mayfield contract, it is extremely reasonable. I think more times than not, we've seen that Tampa is going to retain their talent. So I'm expecting Godwin to be a buck this next year. Yes, the overall offensive regression is going to hit. No, I don't necessarily think that we need to be super concerned about this injury. And yeah, I'm completely fine going through and drafting him as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4. I would do so aggressively, and I think probably if you're waiting to draft until August, he's going to be more expensive by the time we get to then. Somebody else that's going to be much more expensive by the time we get to August is actually going to be Tech McMillan. Now, what's obviously interesting is underdog drafts that are kicking off right this second. This is before the NFL Combine. This is before the NFL Draft. You have no idea what team McMillan is going to be on. So naturally, you would assume that you want a little bit of a discount. But my argument's always, we want to be chasing the highest ceiling possible. I'm fine if I enter 100 underdog drafts and I don't make the playoffs in 99 of them, but I have that one team that's able to make it to the final round and make some noise and hit that top end range of outcome where I find the next Ladd McConkey, I find the next Brian Thomas Jr. I'm fine chasing the ceiling and having a lot of whiffs because you look at these price pools. I mean, the big board, it's a $10 buy-in, $2 million in the total pool. The little board, it's a $3 buy-in, $500,000 in the total pool. These are crazy large tournaments with super high prizes to first place. We need to be swinging for the fences, and I think that's exactly what you're doing with Tech McMillan. And actually, I am going to be swinging for the fences with Underdog Pick'ems during the big game this Sunday. The reason being is Underdog has a no-sweat Pick'em token, and if you are on Underdog, For the love of God, make sure you are taking advantage of this. You'll see it on your Pick'em tab. Just go hit apply promo and you can get a $10 Pick'em in. And even if you miss, even if you lose, you're going to be refunded with Underdog credit. So for me personally, I'm kind of swinging for the fences here. I actually went Saquon Barkley to not have a touchdown in this game, Jalen Hurts to have a rushing touchdown, essentially saying that you will see Jalen Hurts vulture Saquon Barkley at the goal line, and then also Travis Kelce not to have a touchdown. Kelce not to have a touchdown is one of my favorite picks on Underdog at the moment, just given the fact that the volume has been so far down all season. But yeah, that's $10 to win 86. And even if I don't win, because of that no sweat pick'em, Underdog's actually going to refund my entry, so I'm chilling regardless. But of course, if you want to take advantage of that, if you want to have some fun for the game on Sunday, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description and comment section. Code FLOCK will actually get you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. Plus, you will be getting that no sweat free pick'em for the game this Sunday. Underdog's also where you can be drafting 2025 teams today. And yes, you will be getting our draft guide for 2025 if you use code FLOCK on Underdog in 2025. Just let me write the draft guide. It'll be coming your way in a couple months. But anyway, going back to Tet McMillan, right now he's being drafted as a wide receiver 3. He's right after Rome Odunze, kind of just face planted his rookie season. Now, there are definite reasons to be excited about Rome with the change with the coaching staff going into this next year, with Caleb improvement overall, but we don't necessarily need to talk about him here. And he's going right ahead of DK Metcalf, and as somebody who traded for DK Metcalf in the Flock League, you saw him do absolutely nothing in the second half of the season. I have no idea how you're taking Metcalf over Ted at this point. And I know a lot of people here have not had a chance to dive deep in on the rookies. Obviously, we have all the information over on flockfantasy.com for anybody wanting to do so. You actually have a couple Dynasty rookie draft guides already written on the site. This screenshot here is actually from the Dynasty domain draft guide on flockfantasy.com. And here you will see a bunch of interesting statistics regarding Tet McMillan. You can find these on the prospects page on the site as well. My favorite thing to look at is just the dominance compared to the other options in his own offense. Now, obviously, seeing him have over 1,300 receiving yards through 12 games played at a decent school at Arizona, that's impressive in its own right, but we always want to be looking at the context, and the context here makes this production insane. The next leading receiver in this Arizona offense had 323 receiving yards. Yes. The next highest receiving yards per game after Tet McMillan at 110 was Chris Hunter at 26.9. Opposing defenses knew that they had one guy to stop, and they still could not stop him no matter what. This is a receiver that is guaranteed to be a round 1 NFL draft pick. This is a receiver that, if you look at NFL mock draft database right now, is currently projected as a top 10 NFL pick. He accounted for 32% of the receptions at Arizona, 44% of the receiving yards, 44% of the touchdowns. And I actually wanted to go through and I wanted to look at a couple different marks. I wanted to, 1, look at receivers that broke out before 20 years old. 2, receivers that were drafted before pick 23. And 3, receivers that averaged 85 receiving yards per game or more their best season in college. And I wanted to go through and I wanted to date this all the way back to 2016. This is all done on flockfantasy.com. Just go over to the prospects page. And we can see the receivers that are on this list are Corey Davis, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Drake London, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Zay Flowers. What we should probably do is limit this to only Power 5 conferences, and then at that point, you can actually remove Corey Davis. This is an elite level prospect in a wide receiver draft class where there aren't many, and this is someone that we should be extremely excited about. We go back and look at where the rookie wide receivers were being drafted this past year. You had Marvin Harrison at the 1-2 turn. Horrible pick. You had Malik Neighbors going at the end of the second round. I mean, in underdog drafts, it was whatever ends up being the wide receiver 6. But now you are getting Tet McMillan here instead at an appropriate price tag. You are able to swing for the fences, and he is going in the range of the Ladd McConkey, of the Brian Thomas Jr. last year, where he's being drafted as that high-end wide receiver 3. Completely fine to take him in round 5. Yes, the rookie wide receiver hype went way too far with Marvin Harrison Jr. last season going at the 1-2 turn, but this is an appropriate price to go heavy on the top dog. Now, going over to Brandon Ayuk, very interesting profile to look at, right? Ton of risk with this profile as well. But going back to the structure of these underdog tournaments, typically I'm one willing to accept the risk to go through and try to shoot for the upside. With Ayuk, he was horrendous this past year. Yes, he gets injured. Yes, we only get to see him for about 6.5 games. But in that 6.5 game stretch, I believe we had one game with more than 10 fantasy points. A single game. It would have been better if you drafted him and he tore his ACL before the season started, because then you wouldn't have had to keep on starting him and getting 7, getting 8, getting 9 points in your fantasy lineup. It was horrendous. But if we take a step backwards, look at the Brandon Ayuk contract, there's a reason that this team went out of their way to give Brandon Ayuk that mega extension, and why he had multiple suitors, and why this was the number one storyline during all of training camp, not only for this Niners team, but pretty much for all of fantasy football purposes. It's Brandon Ayuk has an incredibly high ceiling. We go back to the last fully healthy season that we saw from Brandon Ayuk back in 2023. He was averaging about 70.5 receiving yards per game. He had almost 1,400 receiving yards. And then we go through and we actually look at what happened in San Francisco with the other wide receivers this past year. Deebo Samuel looked washed. Deebo Samuel looked out of shape. Deebo Samuel did nothing all season when he had every opportunity. So now I'm viewing this going, okay, well, if y'all remember where we stood last offseason, we are trying to go back and forth, figure out, is Deebo the wide receiver one? Is it Brandon Ayuk? I don't necessarily think that's going to be something we have to be concerned about this next year regarding Deebo Samuel. I view Deebo Samuel almost as a non-factor this next year, as aggressive as that sounds. Deebo Samuel is almost going to be off my board entirely. And Brandon Ayuk, you are getting at the wide receiver 40. I'm perfectly fine with this price going right after Calvin Ridley. We're expecting this Niners offense to be great this next year. And a big thing that I want to excuse away the early struggles that we had with Brandon Ayuk is he really didn't train with this team all offseason. He steps in right before the season starts, so I think it's understandable. He's kind of in the doghouse and kind of not ready for the season, which hopefully that won't be the case this next year. Now, the best value in all of Underdog drafts at the moment, to be completely honest with you, if you're not going to draft on Underdog and your regular redraft league, I said this last year and I'll repeat it this year, Quentin Johnston isn't going to make a difference, right? If you're playing in a 10-team ESPN league where you start 2 receivers, 1 flex, there's no world in which Quentin Johnston comes through and he's a great mid-round value. However, similar to last season, where we were soaking up a ridiculous amount of Quentin Johnston past wide receiver 60 in Underdog drafts, I think we can run it back and it can be a profitable move again this offseason. Now, let's go 2 years back and let's remember that Quentin Johnston puts up one of the worst rookie wide receiver seasons that we have had in the past decade from round 1 NFL draft picks. He falls flat on his face with a team with a great quarterback, with a team that had no wide receiver help, with Mike Williams injured and Keenan Allen injured at the end of the year. Quentin Johnston this next season does take a significant step forward. Now, of course, I think a big reason why he's currently going as the wide receiver 64, I think a big reason why he's going rounds after somebody like Marvin Mims is because, yeah, we all remember he's going to drop the ball. You see it on the TV. Everybody gets to clown on him. Everybody gets to make memes of him. I'm not making an argument that Quentin Johnston is some great NFL talent. Ladd McConkey is by far and away the wide receiver 1. But Quentin Johnston is a player that averaged 48 receiving yards per game this past season at 23 years old. If you go through and if you look at his points per game, his receptions a game, his targets a game, and his receiving yards per game, and we compare this to all 23-year-old wide receivers dating back to the year 2000 with the closest comps are T.Y. Hilton, Steve Smith, Devonta Smith, Hollywood Brown, Pierre Garçon, Antonio Bryant, Mike Thomas, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones. Am I sitting here saying, oh, Quentin Johnston's the next Devonta Smith? Of course not. I'm not saying he's the next Steve Smith. But what I'm saying is you're attached to what I perceive to be a great quarterback where I think he can possibly have more passing volume this next year than what we just had with this rush first offense last season. And with the round 1 NFL draft capital, you're really safe as an option to play a ton of snaps, to run a ton of routes, and I'm completely fine seeing some spike weeks here from Quentin Johnston justifying, him as your wide receiver 7. And again, this is the difference between Underdog drafts and like your regular 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex ESPN draft, where if I take Quentin Johnston there in the last round of my ESPN league and he turns out to be a wide receiver 3, it didn't matter. I can pick up that production off the waiver wire any day of the week. However, if you take him at wide receiver 64, wide receiver 65, rounds after Marvin Mims in an Underdog draft, he turns out to be a wide receiver 3, which looks like a okay projection if you look at the historical context. That's a phenomenal pick. So Underdog Drafts particular, I'm really excited about Quentin Johnston. I'm really excited about the game this Sunday. And of course, if you either want to get into an Underdog draft right now, or if you want to have some fun with the game this Sunday, Underdog is doing the No Sweat Pick'em promo. So for the love of God, make sure you hit apply token for that No Sweat promo Pick'em. That way you can go ahead and that way you can get that special offer. And if you use code FLOCK, you're also going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, on top of that, you're going to be getting a 2025 fantasy football draft guide way in the future. We're going to have to send those out when they're done. Of course, it's going to take months. But anyway, my favorite pick right now, Barkley to not score a rushing touchdown. Jalen Hurts to score that rushing touchdown. Travis Kelce not score a touchdown. That's $10 for 86. Use the No Sweat Pick'em. That way, even if we're wrong, which more likely we are, you can go ahead and get that refunded. But thank you again. Really appreciate you and really hope you enjoyed the game this Sunday.